This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Africa introduces tougher anti-pandemic measures as infections surge to over 1 million. Southern Africa braces for tropical storm Chilen set to make landfall in Mozambique. And we tell you how refugee children in Uganda are coping with the closure of schools due to the pandemic. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. But let's start in South Africa, where the government has again tightened its COVID-19 restrictions, banning alcohol sales and extending a nationwide curfew. This as infections surpass the 1 million mark in that country. Recently, authorities confirmed a new, faster spreading variant of the virus was detected in South Africa, and it's driving the second wave of the pandemic. CGTN's Jamela has more.
South Africa is now back on level 3 lockdown from level 1. The South African government employs a risk-adjusted easing of the lockdown, which entails 5 levels. Level 5 is the most severe, while level 1 means life is relatively back to normal. Level 3 also means that the nationwide curfew will be extended. It will now be from 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. Except for permitted workers, emergency and security personnel, nobody will be allowed outside of their place of residence during curfew. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the government has effected this out of necessity.
We are at an extremely dangerous point in our fight against the pandemic. Unless we act now, and unless we act decisively, the number of new infections will far exceed what we experienced during the first wave, and thousands more people will lose their lives.
Many other restrictions have been introduced. These include the ban of sale of alcohol from retail outlets and on-site consumption of alcohol.
According to the data that we have, with every relaxation of the restrictions on the sale of alcohol, the number of trauma cases reporting at our hospitals has increased.
Under the new regulations, the wearing of masks in public will now be mandatory.
A person who does not wear a mask could be arrested and prosecuted. On conviction, they will be liable to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months, or both a fine and imprisonment.
The president has criticized South Africans for largely failing to adhere to the COVID-19 regulations.
We have simply let our guard down, and unfortunately, we are now paying the price. There is none amongst us who can claim that we have not heard of anyone becoming ill or even dying. This is a crisis that affects all of us. This is about our lives. The sooner we understand that it could very well be us in that ambulance speeding by, or us in that hospital bed, or us being buried at that funeral, the sooner we come to the reality of what we are facing right now.
The president says the new regulations will be reviewed within the next few weeks. If there is sustained decline in infections and hospital admissions, the current level might be adjusted again. Yudisa Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Botswana are bracing for Tropical Storm Chilen. The storm caused flooding and damaged electricity poles in the nearby island nation of Madagascar on Sunday. According to year-end reports, it reached the Mozambique Channel on Monday. Mozambique's National Institute of Meteorology predicts the storm could hit central Mozambique on Wednesday. President Filipe Nyusi on Sunday said that the disaster could affect 4 million Mozambicans. He urged those living in flood-prone regions to move to safer areas. In 2019, Cyclone Idai tore through southern Africa. The storm left a trail of destruction and resulted in over 1,000 deaths across Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. A UK charity group says natural disasters have been catastrophic for both rich and poor countries in 2020. Charity Christian Aid says the disasters have caused thousands of deaths and billions of dollars in losses. It says that financial costs tend to be higher in richer countries, but extreme weather events have a generally higher death toll in poorer nations. The agency also called on governments to take appropriate actions as climate change had compounded the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in vulnerable regions. In his New Year's message, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the international community to make 2021 a year of healing.
The central ambition of the United Nations for 2021 is to build a global coalition for carbon neutrality, net zero emissions by 2050. Every government, city, business and individual can play a part in achieving this vision. Together, let's make peace among ourselves and with nature, tackle the climate crisis, stop the spread of COVID-19 and make 2021 a year of healing.
Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore has been sworn in for a second term in office. During the ceremony in the capital Ouagadougou, Kabore promised to ensure peace and security in his next 5-year term. Militant attacks have fueled rising ethnic and religious tensions. This year alone, over 2,000 people were killed in attacks linked to Islam's insurgency. In his inauguration speech, Kabore said he would be particularly attentive to national reconciliation. He won the November 2022 elections with 58% of the vote. Well, let's now go to the latest news coming out of the Central African Republic. More than 14% of polling stations in the country remained closed during Sunday's national elections following violence from armed rebel groups. In some localities, voters were attacked and electoral staff barred, while others were threatened with death if they attempted to participate in the vote. Security forces, including UN peacekeepers, together with reinforcement from Russia and Rwanda, provided protection against attacks in the capital and a few towns. The Electoral Commission is now waiting for results from the country's regions. Once received, the Commission will forward results to the Constitutional Court for publication. Well, schools in Uganda have partly resumed classes, but only for final year students. That still leaves thousands of refugee children stuck at home. They're not learning much and they have few outlets for their energy. Isabel Nakira reports on how aid groups are trying to help them cope with the stress of the pandemic using community play centers.
It's an art class at home for 15-year-old Victoria Amani. She's one of over 230,000 South Sudanese refugees living at the Bidibidi refugee settlement in northern Uganda, most of them children. Art classes and group play are part of the curriculum offered to refugee children here, considered therapy to help deal with their traumatic past brought about by the war back home. This in addition with trying to keep up with schoolwork. Since the pandemic hit in March, refugee children have not been able to go to school or even to access play areas where the therapy takes place. Amani says bringing the lessons to her doorstep is keeping her mind occupied.
Those people who are teaching us.
They are teaching us how to make balls, skipping ropes, drawing and playing, which keeps us busy.
About 1,000 South Sudanese refugee children are enrolled into the child-friendly spaces here at Bidibidi, but have been missing out due to the coronavirus pandemic. Around this time of the year, this space would be filled with children playing all sorts of games. But since March, when school closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this place has been left in limbo. Bidibidi is the largest refugee settlement in Africa. Over 60% of refugees here are children. Amani's mother says she was finding it hard to control her children's movements before the play centers were moved to the community. She says they had become unruly.
By the time when you are staying together, they are always.
While at home, the children had become so stubborn, moving up and down. They didn't even listen to me, their mother.
The refugee agency World Vision is supporting hundreds of refugee children with this type of play learning approach. Child caregivers move to the community, and with locally made play material like balls, ropes and dolls, they help children catch up with psychosocial therapy. Educators are concerned that being idle at home could cause children to stray and pick up bad habits. They say introducing art and play helps instill discipline in children and also helps in healing trauma.
We also extend counseling services to these children. Remember, they go through a lot of challenges in homes. So this support also goes to the parents themselves, because as the caregivers, as we trained the children to build these local materials, we are saying we are not there throughout the day. We also trained parents themselves to be able to support these children when we are not there.
When school closed in March, around 15 million students across the country were affected. But with the phased reopening, only 1.2 million final year students, including refugee children across the country, are back in school.
I missed to meet my friends because of.
I miss my friends. I miss school. I miss discussion groups and everything.
The government provided learning material for refugee children to continue with home learning during the pandemic. But there were not enough materials for each student, and many like Amani missed out. And while it's still uncertain when school will fully reopen in Uganda, the door-to-door play centers are helping fill this gap. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Bidi, Northern Uganda.
Well, let's now take a short break. Here's what you can expect when we return. We'll take a look at China's efforts to develop COVID-19 vaccines. And businesses are thriving in Mogadishu despite a string of Al-Shabaab bombings.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent. To you, the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Well, China has been at the front of the pack with COVID-19 vaccine research this year. Our reporter Wu Gushou has followed the country's progress in developing vaccines in our special year-end report.
A race for life in 2020. China has been one of the world's front runners of COVID-19 vaccines. On April the 2nd, it approved the first COVID-19 vaccine candidate for clinical trials. Since July, 5 have been undergoing final stage human trials in countries like the UAE, Brazil, and Pakistan. At the same time, vaccine makers have been preparing for mass production. Sinovac, maker of one leading candidate, built a new plant chain. In early August, I became the first reporter to have entered its production facility while it was still being tested. Company head in Weidong was happy about results from the first 2 stages of trials.
After performing injections on over 1,000 volunteers, some only showed minor fatigue or discomfort, no more than 5%. As for effectiveness, after 2 injections, almost all volunteers developed antibodies, around 97 to 98%.
Sinopharm's candidate, also an inactivated type, entered phase 3 trials in late June. The company has production facilities in Beijing and Wuhan.
The vaccine has not officially been approved and marketed as of now, but as a commodity, in the case of an emergency, foreign governments can purchase vaccines from us. There is no obstacle to such purchases. We'll supply the vaccine to whoever buys it. This is in compliance with the law.
In early September, the two vaccines developed by Sinopharm and Sinovac were displayed for the public at the China International Fair for Trade and Services.
President Xi has said Chinese vaccines will be public goods in the future. So how will they be distributed as the number are very limited?
Yeah, I think we are also in a way to executing our strategies in line with what President Xi says. So we are aiming to supply the vaccine in China as well as the rest of the world. And also some of the collaborations we are having with different countries are not only doing the trial but also to secure the quantities of supply to them.
For many people, this was the first time they had seen a real COVID-19 vaccine. But China has approved emergency use of 3 vaccines in June, 2 from Sinopharm and 1 from Sinovac. Key groups of people, those with higher risk of infection, are being vaccinated across the country for this winter and spring.
After stringent monitoring and observation, no serious adverse event has occurred. About 60,000 recipients went into high-risk areas abroad for work. So far, serious infections have not been reported.
Chinese vaccines are also being delivered to other countries. One evening in mid-December, I got exclusive access to see how Sinovac delivered 2 million doses to Brazil.
These COVID-19 vaccines can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, similar to the rabies vaccines. It's winter here in Beijing, so this warehouse is actually warmer than outside. In terms of transportation and storage, the hope is it won't place too much of a burden on the distribution systems in place for vaccines across the world.
On December the 9th, the UAE approved Sinopharm's vaccine for market use, saying tests in the country showed it was 86% effective. Around Christmas, Turkish officials said Sinovac's vaccine showed over 90% effectiveness in tests. Brazil's state-run Butantan Institute also announced that Sinovac's vaccine has achieved the levels of efficacy required by the World Health Organization, adding detailed numbers would come later. The two companies are still awaiting market approval for general use in China, but they have already prepared to roll the jabs out domestically. In my most recent visit to its production facilities, Sinovac's workers have been taking 3 shifts to cover 24-hour production.
This is the packaging line, and vaccines in the cases like this are for Indonesia and Turkey. With a new production line ready for use, Sinovac says is able to produce more than 600 million doses a year, not only for China, but also for the whole world. CGTN, Beijing.
The Chinese leadership has outlined the country's rural and agricultural development plans for the coming year. President Xi Jinping talked about the issue during a 2-day conference that concluded today. He said the government should attach great importance to agriculture, consolidate achievements in poverty alleviation and rural revitalization, as well as promote the modernization of the country's agriculture sector. Chinese farmland has increased this year, but experts say there's still plenty of room for improvement. Yashan has more.
Despite the coronavirus pandemic and unfavorable weather, China's grain production totaled about 670 billion kilograms in 2020. China has continued to surpass the country's grain production benchmark of 650 billion kilograms. Experts say that to guarantee food safety, maintaining enough farmland is vital.
We must safeguard the red line of the area of farmland, which is 1.8 billion mu or 0.2 billion hectares. That is to prevent farmland for other use. At the same time, we are working on building high-standard farmland and developing advanced irrigation systems.
In 2020, China has built 80 million mu or 5.33 million hectares of farmland that of high standard. That number is pledged to be 1 billion mu or 67 million hectares in 2 years. Experts say that China is a big country in terms of seed, but not strong. Quality seed only contributes 45% to the increase of grain production and only 40% to stock farming. So there's big room for development.
To enrich the country's seed library, we must concentrate on tackling key problems in developing quality seeds and raising good breeds of livestock, especially to solve those technological problems in this field.
CGTN.
Well, back to the African continent, where a popular restaurant has reopened in Mogadishu 4 months after the militant group Al-Shabaab stormed the facility. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more from Somalia's capital.
Business is booming once again at this hotel in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. The elite hotel has reopened its doors once again to city residents after a deadly terrorist attack. Militant group Al-Shabaab claimed the attack, which killed and injured dozens of people. Abdullah Mohammed Noor, a member of the federal parliament who survived the attack, owns the hotel. Noor says he will expand his business despite threats from the Al-Qaeda affiliated group.
We were attacked for one reason. Al-Shabaab hates to see progress, a peaceful place where people enjoy. It prefers a dark place to thrive. It creates fear to have its way, but we say no to that. We will not accept it. We have moved on, and that's how it's going to continue to be.
In August, a car bomb ripped through the perimeter of the hotel. Armed attackers storming their way in, shooting and killing anyone inside the premises. Special forces from the Somali police ended an hours-long siege while managing to evacuate hundreds.
The biggest threat to private businesses is insecurity. If Somalia was peaceful, it would be a #1 tourism destination for foreigners and expatriates. If the government solves this issue, entrepreneurs will build this country and create massive employment opportunities.
The hotel management says it cost them thousands of dollars to rebuild it after the attack in August. Meanwhile, authorities in Mogadishu say they're working on improving security in efforts to encourage both local and foreign investment.
We are seeing great business investments in the capital, some of them by foreigners. This is a result of the changing business environment and security. Mogadishu is now competing with other capitals of the world.
Mohammed Amin is among the guests attending a private event hosted to mark 1 year in business since the hotel was established.
I am a regular customer at this hotel. I have seen hundreds of graduates in the city jobless. Some have landed jobs here. If we have many similar businesses like this, our young people will be employed. That is my dream.
In January 2016, Al-Shabaab killed scores at another seafront restaurant not far from Elite Hotel. Since then, a string of restaurants have cropped up around the popular Lido Beach, despite an active insurgency by one of Africa's deadliest militant groups. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda are seeking to revive connected ports and maritime operations on the shared waters of Lake Victoria. Experts say the three East African neighbors could generate up to $60 billion in trade annually. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia cruised through the lake to pinpoint areas that remain untapped.
She's one of the larger vessels crossing Lake Victoria. The water bus is a main mode of transport for those who live on the islands. Her mission, transporting hundreds of people and their property daily.
This thing is so nice. The reason is one, it doesn't have a lot of accidents like the road. Secondly, it is cheaper.
On her normal route, she carries people from Rwanda Kotieno to Rusinga Island and back again every 2 to 3 hours. Water buses help keep the wheels of the regional economy turning.
Now, according to the people we've spoken to, there are a lot of opportunities that Lake Victoria dishes out in terms of water transport that are yet to be tapped by the three African countries. These people would have put something that can work from all the three East African countries.
Even though there are many motorboats in the lake, ships are almost non-existent. And a few that can be spotted are considered permanently docked. For people like 60-year-old Tomboya, such pictures serve as a reminder of the old good days. Until the late 80s, ships carrying cargo would arrive at the then vibrant Kisumu port.
It was really, really blossoming. All that stuff from Uganda, like cows, mangoes, fish from Tanzania.
Produce was destined for local markets and beyond to Asia, Europe, and America.
Cargo from abroad imported things all the way from Kenya into Uganda and Tanzania, headed for places like Rwanda and other places. So it's not only serving the three countries, but it was serving much more than the three countries. Let's talk about the lake region countries.
But for years, ships docked along the Kisumu port have been dormant.
The biggest blow came when Kenya Railways stopped operating, and that really affected the business at the port because the trains were no longer coming, and instead we went into road transport and actually started using Malaba route and Busia route.
According to Agina, lake transport only realizes $6 billion annually for Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, but has the potential of generating 10 times that amount. Kenya has been rehabilitating the Kisumu port to position it as a hub for inland maritime transport.
All these will increase business here because there'll be people who are making boats, there'll be people who are repairing them, there'll be people who are supplying them, and there'll be people who are bringing in goods and taking the goods from the port.
But this dream heavily depends on corresponding infrastructure and political goodwill across the water in Uganda and Tanzania. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Kisumu, Kenya.
Here's what's coming up after the short break. In part 2 of our Pandemic Warrior series, we highlight the contribution of health workers during the crisis. Well, the work done by health workers during the pandemic has been impeccable. In part 2 of CGTN's Pandemic Warrior series, we illuminate their heroism.
Throughout 2020, the coronavirus has tested human intelligence. It's stretched the world's resources and put greater demands on all of us. In fact, more than anything else during peacetime. And like soldiers to war, they are frontline workers who have constantly thrown themselves in harm's way, many of them paying the ultimate price.
That's right, Lindy. Many have paid the ultimate price, and this war cannot be fought without them. In our continuing series, CGTN Pandemic Warriors, will feature those who are on the battlefront, those that strive to support them, and some of those that have survived because of the sacrifices healthcare workers around the world have made.
Well, indeed, and there are examples across the continent, but let's for now start in Egypt. With a population of 100 million people, doctors in Egypt have had an immense responsibility when facing this pandemic. Since the country first reported cases in March, they've been on the front line, barely taking a single day off. Well, today we feature 2 doctors from the Ain Shams University Hospital. Dr. Samair Girgis is the deputy manager who faithfully reports to the COVID-19 dedicated facilities each day, while also fighting to ensure that she doesn't bring the virus home to her 70-year-old parents. And her colleague, Dr. Walid Abdallah, also has to keep his 3 young girls safe while staying true to his critical duties at the hospital. Here's CGTN's Adel Al-Makhraoui with that story.
Dr. Samia Girgis is on her way to work. She is the deputy manager of Ain Shams University Hospitals Group. Consisting of 12 hospitals and clinic, one of her duties is to personally inspect the operation in each medical facility she assists in running. We follow her as she prepares to enter a place most of us would not dare to go, the COVID-19 field hospital. As head of the infections control unit, Dr. Gerges has been in the front line of the battle against the virus since Egypt first reported cases in March.
When we learned that it's becoming a pandemic, we summoned all our medical teams and created a crisis plan. We selected one of our hospitals to be dedicated for quarantine and treatment. We wrote a plan to turn our students' dorms and senior homes into COVID-19 facilities if the infections increase, how we will increase beds in the field hospitals.
Dr. Walid Abdallah is the manager of this field hospital. He works alongside Dr. Gerges in facing the pandemic. I met him inside this COVID-19 dedicated unit where he's been working around the clock almost non-stop.
Before starting of the pandemic, you have to be prepared. Before starting of a second wave, that it seems that it has started right now, okay, you have to be prepared. As you can see here, we started our capacity increased. We started to prepare our staff from different departments. Okay, even those who are not well trained as a frontliner, okay, they have a short course of training and they are participating right now.
When was the last time you took a vacation?
I don't remember. Actually, I don't remember.
Ain Shams University has about 3,000 doctors who serve some 1.5 million patients annually. More work has been required from them during the pandemic. They're now under paramount pressure, especially when many of them fell victims to the disease.
You can see a friend intubating or putting his friend on a mechanical ventilation. Okay, he knows it's a very stressful situation for physicians when they are dealing with the disease and when they are dealing with their colleagues as a patient. This will add further stress, actually. You are facing both a disease and your fear. You are afraid that you might be infected and you can transmit infection for your family.
When you ask for their service after all of that, they will say yes. They served the COVID-19 hospitals many, many times. No one ran away from this commitment. They are not afraid.
Nurse Rahab is one of those medical staff. She got infected on duty. Luckily, her symptoms are under control. She tells me that when she's cured, she will resume her services here. In the ICU, beeping of ventilators, heart monitors, and oxygen level machines echoes the space. All patients here are in critical conditions, some worse than others. Nabil Nawar can barely take a proper deep breath. Speaking is great to him. Yet when he saw us, he insisted to talk. He wanted to thank the doctors serving in this facility. Extremely polite, always alert, and exert enormous effort, he tells me.
Since we started practicing medicine here in Egypt, it's about at least 20 years ago, we didn't see something like that. As regards the spread of the number of cases, the burden on the healthcare system, this is the first time to face something like that.
Dr. Gerges lives with her parents. Both of them are over 70. Dr. Abdallah is a father of 3 young daughters. Presence here, all these amazing warriors are putting their lives and the ones they care most about at risk in order to save lives of their fellow countrymen from the disease.
Sumaya Hosani, a doctor originally from Africa, is getting a lot of attention in Wenzhou city in southeastern China. And that's because she's been helping in a fight against the coronavirus pandemic, both in China and in her home country of Mauritius. This is her story.
你是从哪里过来的？
对呀。
对呀，你去温州干嘛？
温州。
你去温州是吗？
送我女儿上班。
我身份证看一下吗？
好。
Wearing protective clothing, Sumaya takes passengers' temperatures. Although she's from Mauritius, she talks to people in fluent Mandarin. Sumaya came to study in China 12 years ago. She and her husband, also a doctor, Abdul Zahir Hamad from Pakistan, have built a life in China. In February, during the coronavirus outbreak in China, she and Abdul chose not to leave. Instead, they joined a team of anti-epidemic volunteers. For 22 days, they screened the temperatures of thousands of passengers passing through a highway toll in Wenzhou.
We really wanted to contribute our part, and we thought no matter how small it was. I worked with nurses, with other doctors from other hospitals, and even on ground level with the people. So I felt the connection, and now I feel I'm more part of the culture, I'm more part of the country.
The Mauritian media quickly picked up Sumaya's story. At first, her family in Mauritius was trying to persuade her to return home. But now they're encouraging her to stay on. On March 18th, Mauritius diagnosed its first cases of COVID-19. What followed were rumors and misinformation across the island nation. In response, Sumaya decided to post a video on social media.
If you wear glasses, you need to press the upper part of the mask on the bridge of the nose like this.
Drawing from her experiences and knowledge gained in China, she shared information on how to prevent being infected and spreading the virus to others. In her video, Sumaya shows the correct way of wearing masks and gloves. She explains what it means to be an asymptomatic patient. She also urges viewers to adhere to lockdown rules. Sumaya said her experience in China won her the trust and support from followers. On learning that Mauritius urgently needed prevention supplies, Sumaya approached the medical center where she worked for help. Her request not only received a positive response from her employer, but also the city government, and a fundraiser was launched.
We're facing this disaster, this challenge of mankind together. We cannot ignore the difficulties Mauritius is experiencing, not to mention the tremendous efforts and contributions made by Sumaya for Wenzhou and China.
On April 18th, medical supplies from China arrived in Mauritius, including masks, protective clothing, and temperature guns. The Mauritian foreign minister praised the anti-epidemic cooperation between the two countries.
China has been very supportive. We have had a number of donations from the government of China. We have learned a lot from what has happened in China, and we have continued with our collaboration.
China went out of its way to really help with this pandemic, and we want to get rid of the virus irrespective of which part of the continent you're from, which country you're from, which race you are. It's just we are all as people, and we're fighting this war together.
That certainly is quite the compelling story there, Lindy. The thing that this pandemic really has brought out is that there's seemingly no end to the amount that people sacrifice in the face of a common, compelling tragedy.
Absolutely. When it comes to sacrifice, journalists themselves have been faced with an interesting dilemma. On the one hand, you want to interact with people, you want to step into communities in order to tell the true story of this pandemic. But on the other hand, you have to consider your own safety and well-being.
Absolutely. And there's a lot more nuanced layers that actually come in on top of that, because you walk into these communities, you actually step out of the office into the real world, and some of the things that we encounter pretty challenging. This adherence to wearing masks, for example, which you face when you're doing some of your stories as well. That isn't you don't have that 100% compliance that you'd expect. And the nuanced reasons for that.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people are far more concerned with the economic consequences of this pandemic than they are about the reality of the virus itself and what it can do. And so journalists then have this predicament in which you have two responsibilities. One in which you must tell this story from this community, but at all times, not only for your own safety, you must wear your mask, because you have to, in a sense, reinforce the reality of this coronavirus pandemic. And decisions that are certainly catching the attention of those at the forefront of this disease. A Congolese professor who was instrumental in the fight against Ebola is now applying that experience to the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, Professor Steve Ahuka believes that key to fighting this pandemic is addressing misunderstandings on COVID-19 amongst the general public. He says it's critical in suppressing the spread of the disease. Well, CGTN's Chris Ochamuringa has his story.
Professor Steve Ahuka heads the virology department at the National Institute of Biomedical Research in Kinshasa. Earlier this year, he was charged with coordinating health teams to help stop the spread of coronavirus in the country.
What we are proud is the capacity for Congolese, as I said, to overcome those, the fact that the country sometimes is not very stable, but we succeed. For example, when we are managing Ebola in the Western, we have been attacked by armed group, but we try to maintain, public health activities, and finally we succeed to stop the outbreak.
The DRC has recorded an increase in COVID-19 cases after the government eased its lockdown in August. The first cases of the pandemic sparked a lot of fear, suspicion, and uncertainty among the public, and misinformation about the disease spread at the speed of the virus, something that Professor Ahuka believes can hinder the efforts to curb the spread. He therefore got busy coordinating activities on the ground to help alleviate these misconceptions in the society.
Thanks to our activities, thanks to the fact that we aimed to commit people, and now we are having less, resistance, less misunderstanding. People are more, are more committed. But of course, there are always some people who are not, believing that COVID-19 is, a very threat for us.
DRC's capital, Kinshasa, is the epicenter of the outbreak, with over 11,000 cases since many here don't believe COVID-19 exists. The government has now imposed a curfew and tightened measures to limit the spread of the disease. Health officials who've worked with Professor Ahuka praise him for his contribution in tackling the pandemic.
He is the incident manager. He played a great role in supporting Professor Muyembe, the head of the National Task Force in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. He's ensured that testing kits are available and other activities are done well.
The DRC's National Institute of Biomedical Research is at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19. It's been plagued by logistical challenges due to the numerous epidemics that the country has had to deal with over the past 2 years. But Professor Ahuka is still striving to put his best foot forward.
Let's turn now to today's installment of Voices of the People and have a listen to some of the lessons learned from the pandemic.
So, we learned how to work together, the way to do what we are capable of without outside help. There were no foreign doctors, whether it's Italian or Turkish, who are helping Somalia's health sector. Every suspected COVID-19 case was sent to Martini Hospital with only Somali doctors operating there. All the senior and junior doctors and the nurses in the hospital were Somalis. So, we can say that COVID-19 was a wake-up call to all of us. We learned that we possess the power to work for our people, the power to save our people, and if we cooperate, we will never fail.
There is a need to really step up on the research and come up with innovations that can help the citizenry irrespective of their domicile.
Battling COVID-19 has left many with emotional and physical scars. They very well have long-term consequences. But those who got infected and survived are overwhelmingly left with a great sense of gratitude that they did make it through.
Indeed, and it is important to point that out. Lots of people did survive COVID-19. Here's CGTN's Enoch Sikolia bringing you the story of one such survivor, Benson Musungu. He paints a very vivid picture of what it's like to be fighting for your life for days, unable to breathe naturally and having to depend on ventilators for your next breath. He fought, he survived, and this is his story.
It's been nearly 3 months since Benson Musungu walked into the Aga Khan University Hospital in Nairobi for treatment.
Immediately I got at the reception, my breath went out, and after that, of course, they took me straight to the ICU. And that time my diagnosis was maybe I have pneumonia, and that pneumonia was very chronic because it was taking away my breath.
That would change after a COVID-19 test turned positive. At this time, Musungu had already been placed on oxygen therapy for the ventilators to support his now weak lungs.
Initially, they had connected me to the normal oxygen. Yes, just oxygen wires. Then it was not working. I needed more oxygen, so they had to connect me to a ventilator. And yeah, that is what kept me alive for some time.
Musungu narrates why he thinks the virus almost took him to the brink.
When I was still at home first, I lost appetite for a long time. Nearly 8 days. I was not eating. I was not even going to the loo. So I had nothing in my body. So the COVID found my body when it was very weak. My system was very low.
For 15 days, Musungu was on a ventilator. The medical team at the Aga Khan Hospital was hopeful, but uncertain of his future.
Every day they could remove blood from me, morning, lunchtime, and in the evening. So all these tests they ran to see how is my system behaving. Yeah, behaving with the drugs that they're putting on me. And they're putting me different drugs.
None of his relations nor workmates were allowed to see him in the ICU. It was a lonely battle against a highly contagious virus that was leaving a trail of death globally. His doctors, nurses, and cleaners were his only companions. But again, he only knew them by names written on their PPEs.
And when that person comes in that place, you can't see them. You can only hear their voice because they are protecting themselves against this virus. I saw people who were treating me the last day I was leaving hospital when they were coming around my hospital bed because I had now been confirmed now negative after 22 days. So that's the first time I'd say, yeah, you are the lady, you are the doctor who was taking blood from me because I can hear that of the voice.
Besides feeling weak and unable to walk, Musungu felt later he lost a lot of weight. He says his story is that of back from the brink. Many people still deny the existence of COVID-19, and many Kenyans go about their business without putting on a face mask or maintaining social distance. But having survived the disease, Benson Musungu now advocates even more for people to protect themselves against the virus. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Philanthropy and activism have helped the continent keep its head above the water, even as the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to completely overwhelm public healthcare systems that are often underfunded and overstretched.
Now, one of the most striking examples, Rama, came out of South Africa. As we know, the country implemented one of the world's strictest lockdowns to curb the spread of the coronavirus. And some of these measures, in fact, battered the economy, leaving millions of people facing both hunger and unemployment.
Indeed, and we, of course, did report on these stories, and the data coming out of South Africa was fairly grim. That said, under the umbrella of Cape Town Together, various neighborhood networks right across the city joined forces to help those in need. Today, we'll take a look at the community of Salt River, where one activist, Dr. Leanne Brady, and other selfless volunteers came together against all the odds to feed the hungry while bridging the divides of race and class. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with that story.
South Africa's lockdown laid the country's inequalities bare. A reality lived daily by Salt River residents, a suburb located east of Cape Town. Health activist Dr. Leanne Brady, together with a team of Salt River volunteers, started a veggie garden during the lockdown to feed those in need.
There's two. There's another one at the back.
My name's Leanne Brady. I'm part of the public ambulance service,
and part of the Salt River Can, which is part of a broader network across Cape Town that started as a community-led response to the COVID pandemic. In a city as divided as Cape Town, as unequal as Cape Town, it was important to recognize that this pandemic affects all of us, but it doesn't affect all of us equally.
Salt River's Veggie Garden joins over 150 community action networks known as CANs that sprung across the city in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's different, but they all work as a part of the Greater Cape Town Together initiative.
I am Marius. I live here in Salt River, and I'm a part of this beautiful garden, and I'm a part of initiating and building it. During COVID, like the stark food insecurity in our neighborhood really came to surface.
We realized that there was a dire need for food in the community, and everybody just rallied around beautifully. And I think that's the power of people getting together. It was always our vision, Marius and I, our vision to do a food garden. I was approached by Leanne Brady, and we got chatting about how that garden was started, and then she had the idea for a food garden.
We haven't had a sort of a global disaster of this scale since World War II. So we're living through extraordinarily difficult times. In Salt River, we started this veggie garden. There was also a bunch of other things, food distribution. We have a large kind of homeless population in Salt River, and many more people were pushed onto the streets during lockdown. And so there was a food distribution program that the Salt River Can also ran.
In times of need, you have to reach out. You think you are in a bad situation, the person next door or further away of the other communities, it's in a worse scenario.
I really do this from my heart. I think when one is involved, you sort of see the need. You always hear it's on TV, but when you're involved, you see the cries of the people, you see the hunger. Leanne is a fantastic person. She's driven. She's definitely a leader. She got the community together and got everybody to have the same sort of passion, to drive, get into this veggie garden.
I think there's a lot of things that we need to learn from this pandemic, and it's teaching us how we should be shaping our society, and those lessons are being developed from the bottom up.
Because we're not out of the woods and there is talk of a second wave, I think that where food supply is concerned, so definitely I would do what I'm doing and try to the best of my ability to sort of just give a little to our community.
There are over 2,000 volunteers registered in about 150 community action networks across Cape Town, and these neighbourhood-based groups have responded in unique and diverse ways, making sure no one goes hungry.
Those certainly are refreshing stories there, Lindy. And talking of refreshing moments, the fact is, nature took quite a rare break, given by all these lockdowns around the world, to get a proverbial fresh of breath air. As we human beings, all 7 billion of us, mostly stayed home.
A well-deserved break for nature, and that brings us to our next segment, Pandemic's Gift to Nature. Today, we take a look at animals. So as lockdowns took effect, it would seem that creatures big and small emerged from their nook and crannies to reclaim their rightful place on this earth.
Indeed, they certainly did, and in many different ways and in many bases, as all of these lovely pictures will show you.
Let's start here in Wales, in Llandudno. I love this picture. These wild goats happily roaming the streets of Wales without a care in the world.
You could actually caption that with, where are all the humans? Because they all disappeared at some point in time in some pretty severe lockdowns across the UK. Pretty much the same thing happened in England as well. This particular shot was taken in Essex. The deer just sitting around. I mean, this is basically in, a housing area, and they're like, yeah, well.
I mean, the camera person must have been quite close, and they didn't even move, nothing. They're just very, very comfortable.
This is basically them saying, look, human, this is our space. you guys need to go away now.
Exactly. What's amazing also is this picture coming out of India, the olive ridley turtles on the beach. Now, there are a number of species, turtle species that are becoming endangered, some very close to extinction. But what we can see here is that these populations have been able to thrive, they've been reproducing, and they're out in their numbers now, happily enjoying the beach.
And of course, we've got the civet, critically endangered species, mainly omnivore, I believe. If you're a coffee lover, you will definitely know exactly what this little guy is all about. But here he is, wandering around in Delhi when that country implemented its very strict lockdowns. And it's a tease.
Absolutely. This is all a lot of good news for many critically endangered species around the world.
Indeed, it certainly is. And now here's some more images, not just this lot, but from the pandemic that are likely to be part of our collective history for generations to come.
Well, tomorrow we come to our final episode of Pandemic Warriors, where we'll feature a few more stories about those who did not cower from uncertainty and fear. The warriors who've been waking up each day to keep society functioning, even as most of the world sheltered in place. Back to you in studio.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for that, Lindy and Rama and all the teams that worked on that incredible production. Well, that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember that you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. For me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Africa Live team, thank you so much for watching. Global Biz is up next.